Well, welcome everybody. This is Scott Piachetti from GeoPath. I just want to say thank you to all of you for joining today. There's so many of you who signed up for this session, and we're really excited to talk about today the foundations of media measurement. And just to take a step back, hopefully you've seen in our newsletter, and maybe if you joined the session that we had a few weeks ago, we wanted to do this series on measurement and methodology. So throughout the course of this year, and we'll talk more about that at the end of this session, we're going to be doing a series of webinars. So we felt like today, kicking it off, it was really best to just kind of go all the way back and really start at the foundations of media math. And, I think even for myself, it's always nice to have a quick refresher, but there's always a lot of new people coming into the industry. So we thought it would be a really great session to do for everybody. I do a session like this at the conference, but I often know, not everybody is at the conference and or even can attend that session. So we wanted to do this as a session for the larger group of our membership. So hopefully you'll all find value in it. And I just want, before, without further ado, want to tell you who's going to be helping out today and what we're going to cover. So Brian Shopper, who often on our sessions is here with me, as well as AJ Chaffee. We're going to all be presenting and covering a bunch of different things. And what we really want to cover are some really key topics that are often in terms that are used throughout the industry, and just want to level set everybody, make sure we're all thinking about it the same way when we hear things like, what is universe, or what are impressions? What does that mean when you say impressions? So AJ will take us through those couple of sections, and then Brian will talk about, what are GRPs and TRPs? What does that really mean? And then talk about the foundations of reach and frequency, not necessarily methodology, but what essentially is reach and what is frequency. And then I'll come back in and we'll talk about audience composition as well as composition index. So regarding just questions, if you do have questions, definitely ask us. This is what this session is about. We're going to do our best to try to get to everybody's questions. But given that we're all here for an hour and we have a lot to cover, if we can't get to everybody's, we definitely ask that you reach out to us at geekOut@geopath.org, or, we'll also try to reach out directly to anyone that has a question if we couldn't get to it. So thank you again for joining, and we'll get right into it. So the foundation basics for understanding media measurement. So I'm going to hand it off to AJ, and he's going to talk a little bit about universe.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Well, to start off the session, let's begin by discussing universe and what this means in relation to media math. The universe is defined as the population of the group being measured within a specific geographic area. There are two components that the universe is based upon: the demographic profile and the geographic area. First, let's look at the first of these components, geography. Geography in terms of a universe is the media market from where the advertiser sources their business. It can be identified through standard media markets or custom markets as well. Standard media markets that are often used by advertisers include designated market areas, also known as DMAs, and core-based statistical areas, also known as CBSAs. DMAs are used predominantly by national advertisers and originate from television markets created by Nielsen. DMAs cover the major metropolitan areas as well as additional nearby locations. In total, the United States is divided into 210 DMAs. CBSAs, on the other hand, are typically an out-of-home default geography. They're defined as a metropolitan area within larger markets, such as within a DMA, containing a substantial population that consists of one or more urban centers of at least 10,000 people. In total, there are over 917 CBSAs that cover the entirety of the United States. Next slide. Thank you. Outside standard media markets, advertisers often use custom markets as well. Custom markets include counties, zip codes, and census blocks. Although not used as much as DMAs and CBSAs, these smaller media markets allow advertisers to drill down to a limited geography to focus on specific populations.
Right. And just to jump in too, I know we talk a little bit about census blocks and, if you've been in any of the trainings that I might have done, custom trainings with any of your teams, I think one way I think about census blocks, just uh, anecdotally, maybe that's a good way to say it. It's just like I think about it as a neighborhood, roughly. It's about approximately 400 to 600 households, maybe 1,000 people. And it could range in geography and size, depending on if you're in a city or if you're in kind of more of a rural area. But that's just kind of a way that I kind of shorthand think about it.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, no problem.
So the selection between these media markets that advertisers want to evaluate their media against is critical, as different market types have differing area coverage and population bases. As evidenced in this chart right here, you can see the difference between the adult 18 plus population between the Atlanta DMA and CBSA. The market size and differing population bases will have effects on advertisers' campaign delivery. For example, coverage with 35 panels for 4 weeks in both markets will generate a higher reach of 73% in the CBSA of Atlanta compared to the 63% reach in the DMA of Atlanta, as the population of the CBSA is much smaller. With the geography component of the universe explained, let's dive into the other component of the universe, the demographic profile. In general, media metrics can be reported against a variety of demographic segments, such as age, gender, income, and race or ethnicity. Additionally, advertisers can also combine multiple audience segments for more complex targets, such as males 18 to 34 with a household income of 75 plus. I would also like to note, within the GeoPath Insight suite, you're also able to use complex target audiences, such as the consumer profiles and behavioral segments sourced through our partners at Claritas. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we've talked about the two components of the demographic profile and geography that define universe, should be clear how the combination of these geographies and audience segments affect the universe size. But let's look at an example before we move on. In this chart shown, each column reflects a demographic and geographic combination. The adult 18 plus population varies from 5.2 million within the Atlanta DMA to 4.3 million in the Atlanta CBSA. However, there is also a difference when you compare a more complex target, such as adults 18 to 49, between the DMA and CBSA.
So yeah, I mean, as you can see here, like, depending on what your geography is, it is, it definitely impacts the population that you're referring to. And as you kind of look, even across the DMA, if you're refining your target, you're also looking at a different kind of population among each of those examples.
Correct, and that's logical as the market sizes. I mean, DMAs kind of encompass a CBSA. Mm-hmm. With that said, let's recap quickly on what the universe is in relation to media math. The universe is defined as a total group of persons within a specific geographic area.
Hello, AJ, are you?
That share a common character. Sorry, did I cut out?
I don't know. You cut out for me. I don't know if others.
Yeah. Sorry, this is Brian. You did cut out. If you could go back.
All right. Yeah, sure. So the universe is defined as a total group of persons within a specific geographic area that share a common characteristic. It is up to advertisers to determine the market selection and target demographic, and these selections create their target universe. Oftentimes, advertisers may want to look at campaign delivery against multiple universes.
Great.
Let me know I cut out. I was talking to myself.
No different than usual, right?
Yeah, no different.
And just the universe, in general, it is really a good, thing to understand. And I think we don't always talk about it. Maybe we don't talk about it enough, but, it does form that basis of kind of the basis of how you start to calculate and do, calculations around your other factors, your media math, sorry, blah. So next we'll talk about impressions, and we have a short video that we'll play. We'll do this throughout. We'll have that'll help kind of provide an overview of what we're going to be talking about, and then we'll come back in and show a few slides and really try to expand on the points from the video as well. So bear with me a second as I just make sure I do play this well for everybody.
The basic definition of impressions is a gross count of advertising exposures. That means each time an ad is viewed, that generates an impression. The concept is that one person can produce more than one impression as each view is counted, whether the ad is being seen for the first or the 10th time by the same person. So although an ad achieves 100 impressions, that doesn't mean it's seen by 100 people. It has duplication, so it could only be reaching a few people multiple times. Impressions are an important metric and are the foundational currency of most media, as they can be compared and added across channels. Because impressions include duplication, they can be added if the universe base both demographically and geographically is consistent. You can add impressions across different media types, time period, and out-of-home inventory formats, which ties back to it being the basic unit of media measurement. The basic definition of impressions.
Sorry about that, everyone.
All right, well, before we recap the major points, let's just touch base on that last portion of the video and tie impressions back into our previous section detailing universe. Impressions must have the same universe base demographically and geographically. This consistency is important, so impressions can be added across different media types. Now let's recap the major things to remember about impressions. Impressions are the basic metric of media measurement and represent a gross count of advertising exposures. Impressions have duplication, so one person can account for multiple impressions and is not a unique number of people seeing the advertisement.
Right, and I think that's a key point to recognize about impressions, right? There is duplication within impressions. And so I think that's important, because as we start to get to talk about reach and frequency, that's where you start to differentiate between unique exposures versus multiple exposures. So next we'll jump into GRPs and TRPs. And again, we have a short video that we'll play, and then Brian will come in and chat more about what they are, talk about examples, how do you calculate that as well. So hopefully I'll be a little more efficient at sharing this time.
Out of all the media terms in advertising measurement, GRPs and TRPs can be the easiest to misunderstand. But don't worry, they are a simple calculation based on impressions and universe base. And after watching this video, you will be a whiz at calculating them. GRPs and TRPs are a way to quantify the number of exposures, which are impressions, as a gross percentage of a specific population. Using GRPs makes it easier to plan and buy any media. It is a metric planners and advertisers use to compare media within and across channels and markets. It's a simple formula that takes the universe impressions and divides it by the universe population. For example, if we have 12 million impressions with a population of 8 million adult 18+ population, that would equate to 150 GRPs. And 150 GRPs are 150% of the universe base. So what does that mean? GRPs and TRPs can be greater than 100%, and that's because just like impressions, GRPs and TRPs account for duplication of exposures. Just like impressions, GRPs and TRPs can be added across out-of-home formats as well as other media, as long as the universe base is the same. This allows clients to compare and evaluate the media weight of a campaign in a standardized way.
Okay.
Out of all the...
Sorry, I did that again. Okay.
All right, great. Thanks, Scott.
Yep.
Yeah, so as the video just covered, with GRPs and TRPs, there is some bit of difference between the two, and I just want to touch on that before we go a little bit further. So anytime you see GRPs, that stands for gross rating points. And in our legacy system, in our legacy data at least, that used to be based on an 18 plus, or you had the option for a 5 plus universe as well. But generally speaking, our legacy data was set against an 18 plus universe. And so the reason that I point that out is because now in the insights data, anytime you see total impressions or total population, or in this case, gross impressions, gross population, that's always against person 0 plus. So just something I want to make mention of. Again, with the insights data, anytime it's total or gross, that is person 0 plus. But then if we look to the right here now, we see we also have the option to use target rating points, or TRPs. And that would be something more specific to a demographic target, like for example, 18 to 49. And largely speaking, in a general sense, the out-of-home industry has more so transitioned towards TRPs than using GRPs, and you'll see that across. If you've used the Insights suite and if you look at our data while you're in there, you'll almost exclusively see TRPs, just because our gross population now is again 0 plus. But that's just sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, and just to jump in too, and I think TRPs are just, I think, becoming the more common term across media channels anyway, versus using the reference of GRP. So it's just the kind of the nomenclature that I think is being used. And again, I just want to remind anybody, if you did have a question or anything, definitely put it in the Q&A chat with the Q&A widget, and we'll try to answer them as we go along.
Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
So as the video talked about, it briefly covered the calculation here for GRPs and TRPs, but I want to walk through that a little bit more closely. So the calculation is really the same for both GRPs and TRPs. It really just depends on what your audience is that you have applied. But speaking about the GRPs, about the gross universe, or the gross rating points, the way that this is calculated, you take the impressions for whatever your universe is. So in this case, we're looking at about 15 million impressions. Then you divide that number by the universe base. In this case, again, because this is gross rating points, the universe is 0 plus. So here we have a population of 10,000 0 plus. And then you multiply that number to get a full number. But if we continue that out, so 1 point, there we go. I think there we go. So this impression here, or this equation here, would result in 150 GRPs. And really the only difference between this as GRPs and if it were TRPs is, instead of having a 0 plus audience base, again, it could be something like has been online banking in the last 30 days, or just any of the thousands of different audience targets that we have in the Insights suite. But anytime you're using a more specific audience target than 0 plus, you're looking at TRPs, or your target rating points. So, excuse me. Yeah, Scott, if you could actually load this full chart, or sure, the next couple. One of the really interesting things about TRPs is it allows you to look across markets and also across channels as well. And it helps you understand. Scott, could you go to the next build as well? Perfect, thank you. So if we take a look here, just 2 different example markets, you can see right in that middle column, we have 200 TRPs for both. So that's our goal for both of these. And it's really interesting because setting a TRP level, or using a sort of standard TRP level, will allow you to compare different markets, different campaigns, all sort of against the same factor. So here, looking at Salt Lake City market and also New York as the market, I'm assuming these are the DMAs. So looking at the Salt Lake City DMA, we can see the 18 to 49 population is about 1.4 million. So the New York's population for that same target demographic is about 8 million higher, or 8 million more people. But we're looking at the same TRP level in the middle, and you can see just based on, because of the amount of population difference, the impression levels are vastly different as well. But we can use TRPs to get us to a similar, what we call media weight. I mean, essentially media weight is just a way to be able to look proportionally at the impact of either different campaigns, or at different markets for the same campaign, or again, even maybe different channels. So you could look at 200 TRPs in out of home and 200 TRPs in radio or something, and you would be able to understand how to reach effectively the same proportion of people in the same market.
Right. Yeah. And I think just one way I like to say it too, it's, just when you think about media weight, you're trying to be able to compare across markets. So you're wanting to ensure that you're having that same impact in Salt Lake City with your campaign that you are in New York City. So that's kind of helps normalize it, so to speak. So you have that sense of kind of the same, the same impact across markets. There's been a number of questions about like, are we going to provide these slides and where is this going to be available? So yes, this session will be available shortly after on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. And all these materials, the videos, there's also one pages that go along with this, is available in our Geek Out library as well as in our Learning Lab. So there's a lot of more of this information available as well. So we'll talk about it afterwards, and we'll point you to those as well. And then there was a question I think about, and if I'm interpreting it right, question about what's a typical TRP for a campaign. At least that's how I'm kind of paraphrasing it. And I don't know that that's an easy question to answer. I think a lot of times it's based on the client's needs and what they're trying to do and your overall goal. Is it about awareness? Is it about creating additional reach, or it depends on ultimately your goal a lot of times. So I don't know that there's one right answer to it, but I do think clients and different planners may have their own preferences on that. And there's a lot of art and the science to some of this stuff. And even as we get to the end of the session today, I have an example that again really kind of helps to illustrate that. So sorry, I'll hand it back to you, Brian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds good. Next slide, please. So just a few things to reiterate about GRPs and TRPs. Again, impressions and GRPs are interrelated because you use impressions to calculate GRPs. And once again, just for everybody, just to say again, the way you find out the GRPs or the TRPs, you take the impression number and divide it by the population of whatever your audience base is, and then multiply that by 100. And so effectively, GRPs and TRPs are just a different way to quantify impressions as a percentage of a population. And so I think that's just about it as far as the things I wanted to cover here.
Great. And next, we'll figure out how that plays into what reach and frequency are. And so again, we have a short video that we'll play, and then we'll follow up with some more, points on it. So let me just share that quickly.
I believe this video is actually my voice. So you'll hear my voice and then my voice again.
Yeah, I think that's the same for the section I'm presenting too. So here we go.
In the impression and GRP videos, we discussed how those metrics reflect exposure to a campaign, whether as a gross count defined as impressions, or as a gross percentage of a population defined as GRPs. These metrics have duplicated views in their calculations and provide a measure of tonnage and media weight. When an advertiser wants to know how many different people will see an advertisement and how often, the metrics used are reach and frequency. Reach measures how many different people will see an advertisement. It counts each person only once, no matter how many times they see a unit during the reported period. Therefore, total reach can never be more than 100%. Frequency measures the average number of times the target audience will see the advertisement in a specific time period. Let's break it down with an example. Say there's a universe of 10 people. 7 out of 10 saw the ad, therefore the reach is 70%. The frequency, or number of times they see the ad, varies by person depending on their travel patterns around the market. Reach and frequency are very helpful measures of campaign performance. These two basic measurements are a terrific way to quantitatively explain what a campaign delivers for both local and national advertisers.
Great.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Impression in the impression and GRP.
Sorry, I can't get it to stop doing that. Apologies.
Yeah, so as we just talked about, or as I just talked about in that video, I'll just kind of reiterate that same point again with a little bit more context so we understand here. So when we talk about reach and frequency, those are two separate metrics, but often are used in an interrelated way because they talk about two different aspects of the same kind of thing. So for reach, again, reach is the the different number of people who've been reached by a campaign. So if we look at this example here, again, we have a universe of 10, and you can see 3 of these people in this universe did not see the ad. So in this example right here, our reach is 70%. Then if we look at frequency on top of that, that's the average number of times that the ad was seen by the entire universe. And the way that we find that out is we look at the number of times that each person saw it and then divide it by the population of the universe. So in this instance here, so some of these people saw it just once, a couple saw it twice, and some saw it 4 or 5 times. So all of that gets factored into the average frequency for the entire universe. And we also, on top of that, there's a metric that if you've ever been in the Insight Suite, specifically in the workspace module, there's also a concept of effective reach, which is the percent of people who saw an ad 3 times or more. So it is in a way kind of a combination of reach and frequency, but it just kind of helps you get a better understanding of how far and how wide reaching your campaign was.
Right. And so if you want to, like for this example, if we want to carry that even further and say like, okay, what's the effective reach, 3+. So you'd look at all of the people here who've seen the ad 3 or more times. So it looks like 1, 2, 3 of the 7 people saw it. So that's how you kind of think about kind of the reach, the effective reach percent. So whatever 3 divided by 7 is.
So reach and frequency themselves, as you can see here, it's a little bit of a balancing act for your campaign. And in an ideal world, both reach and frequency would be optimized for a campaign. But realistically speaking, that's usually not feasible on a budgetary level. So there are certain instances where you might want to favor reach over frequency or vice versa. So for example, we might want to optimize on reach if it's a brand with few competitors, if they're established, if it's something that's a pretty infrequent purchase, or it's very seasonal maybe. So for example, Coca-Cola would be a good example. Like, they of course have competitors, but they're a very global presence. They're a very big brand, very well established, have a lot of constant business. And it's just a good way for them to stay top of mind if they were to optimize on reach. So maybe there's a Coca-Cola campaign they're running, and they're not really concerned about hitting the same people over and over and over again, but they just want to hit as many people as possible with the campaign. So a really wide-reaching campaign. And maybe something else in this kind of realm would be a car dealership or a new car sale or something like that. It's an infrequent purchase. It's not something that people do very often, so it's something you want to spread the word about pretty far, so you can get a lot of word out there to a lot of people about a big sale or a big promotion or something like that. And then on the flip side of that, optimizing frequency would be really good if there's a brand with maybe a lot of competitors, or maybe it's even a new brand, and they want to get some people to be more loyal customers and really get a recurring customer base. So for example, maybe there's something even as simple as like a toothpaste advertisement. There's tons of different toothpaste brands, and if you really want to acquire new customers or really want to drive a message home with a specific targeted group of people, optimizing on frequency might be a good way to go, because you can really focus on repeat exposures of the same people over and over again to really drive home either a message or a brand or something like that. Yes, next slide, thank you. So reach and frequency, you can use them as well to calculate GRPs and TRPs. And it's actually just a simple multiplication problem here. But one thing that I want to point out, in addition to the actual math of this, reach and frequency they basically occur in an inverse relationship to each other. So generally speaking, the larger your reach, the bigger your reach, generally the lower the frequency it is. So the more individual different people that you've reached with your campaign, the fewer times you've reached those people each time. But then on the other side, if you're going for a frequency-centric campaign and you're really trying to drive home hitting the same people over and over again, generally reach will end up being lower when you do something like that. And they're both a function of GRPs and TRPs in that sense as well. Yeah, I think, yeah, perfect. Just a couple things to reiterate about that. So this is actually a great point right up here at the top. So once again, reach is the amount of different people who have seen an ad. Another term that we use and that you might see in the Insights suite is reach net, which is just the actual number of people. So a lot of times when you'll see reach, that's represented as a percentage. So say, for example, I had an audience target of 18 to 35, and I reached 25% with that. So just looking at that, that would tell me that I reached 25% of the population that falls into that demographic. But and that going back to my point about reach net, if it were expressed as like 30,000 was my reach net, that would be the actual individual number of people reached by that. But anyway, so reach cannot be added. And the reason that that's mentioned here is because things like impressions and GRPs and TRPs can be added. But reach and frequency, because their metrics are a bit more complicated in the calculations of that, it's not as simple as just being able to add them, because there could be a lot of different factors that are not the same, and also duplication. So just remember, you can't just add reach percentages. Frequency, again, is the average number of times that the advertisement is seen. And so that's, again, that's found out by the amount of times it's individually seen, and then it's looked at the average. And like I said a minute ago, they are in an inverse relationship with each other. So generally when one is optimized or one is favored, the other is kind of less so favored.
Cool. There was a question that came up just asking us about the source and what we're using to help calculate our reach and frequency. And I wouldn't want to get too deep into that necessarily, at least in this session. There was a question like, is it mobile data? And yes, the mobile data is really helping us create that a greater level of sensitivity to our reach and frequency calculation. So, all of that data is helping us understand where people are in the market, and deduping it and all of that sense. So, so yes, to some extent, the mobile data is helping provide insight into that. So the next section is composition. So audience count, there's two parts to this. We're going to talk about audience composition percent, as well as composition index. So I'll play again a short video. You're going to hear my voice again in the video, but then I'll come back and, like I said, I'll try to provide some context and some examples to it as well. So I'm just going to do another share and share the sound so you can hear the video better. Another way to use ratings to evaluate any media's ability to target an audience is to consider percent composition. Composition expresses the percent of a unit's impressions that are made up of a particular audience. Think of it as a pie chart with slices representing different unique audiences. It can be based on any demographic profile available in the GeoPath database. Let's look at how it's calculated using an impression-based example. The target audience impressions are divided by the base of the total audience impressions. Composition gives us a measure of audience concentration on a location-by-location basis. If a location, for example, has 7,791,000 total adult 18-plus impressions, of which 2,161,000 of those impressions are against adults age 18 to 49 with a household income of 75,000 or more, we get a 27.7% composition. What does that mean? 27.7% of this location's total impressions are against this defined audience. Locations that have a high composition of a target audience means that there is a much higher likelihood of the advertiser's message getting in front of the right audience. So, another way to use rate. So, oops, sorry about that. So, if you've ever been in any of my training sessions, and I talk about composition, again, I often like to try to create these shorthands for me, and I've been trying to kind of use those terms throughout. And one of the way I think of composition percent is efficiency, right? How efficient is the unit at reaching the audience you're trying to target? Um, and there's a number of ways to think about that. If you put it in the context of some of the stuff we've been talking about today, you can look at composition as, in a sense, like that quality of audience. So, quality being, am I reaching the audience that I'm trying to reach, or are there quote unquote wasted impressions? And when you think about impressions, you're talking about quantity, that the mass scale of audience, but both are important, right? But and need to be considered. But again, it's really put in the context of your goals, what are your clients' goals, and just kind of looking at the market and the inventory in general. So, if we just use composition and think about composition, it may guide you to this idea of like, allows you to consider a you know, group of units that may have smaller impressions, smaller number of impressions, but a higher concentration. So it starts to guide you down that path, and you need to think about that in context against other units that may have a lot of impressions, that may generate a lot of impressions, but maybe not as much audience composition, or have a lower percent composition. So just I'll jump to this example and really start to use that to try to illustrate what I'm talking about here. So, here's a list of just some random units, random panels, and you could see varying impression levels. P30, obviously is the most of 471,000, but you look at two units here in particular, P20 and P50, right? While they may not have the most impressions, if you look at their composition, they have a pretty high composition, right? So 66, they're among the highest, P20 in particular is the highest among this group of units that we're looking at. So what am I saying? I'm saying that among those 40, among those impressions that it generates, I want to go back to this slide. So you could see among all those 18 plus impressions, 79,000, 66% of them are among the target impression of whatever we're trying to reach. So it has a high percent, target percent, target percent composition. Sorry if I fumbled over that. But it is of note too, just to look at this P30, right? It generates in general 1 million impressions, almost 500,000 against your target, but there's a lot of, more than half of all those impressions are being seen by, a group that is not necessarily your target. So again, it's not right or wrong. It's just like, it's something to think about in the context of when you're planning and what you use and how you select your inventory. And again, there's different, everybody has their own way, their own preference. Like I'm saying, nothing is right or wrong. But as it's all in the context of what are the goals of your scenario that you're trying to plan out. So again, looking here, it does help you understand that, maybe some of the units like P30 that generate a lot of impressions, they may be in higher demand or they may be more expensive. So looking and using target percent comp allows you to maybe look at units that are really reaching your audience really efficiently, but also maybe more available or maybe more budget friendly and things like that. So you can look at it in context of that as well. So that in and of itself is, composition percent in and of itself is a great factor, right? But if you use that alone, you may always think that you need to just be looking at those with high comp percents. But it's important to understand, like, how prevalent is that audience within your overall market that you're looking at, because that also helps guide you. So for example, let's say you have a target comp percent of 15%. Doesn't sound great, But what if you know that in your market that audience is only 10, makes up only 10% of the market? Well, that unit's actually doing really great because it's over indexing for reaching that audience. And that's the next thing I want to talk about is this idea of composition index. And the way you do that is you look at the percent target comp, so what we just talked about, and then you divide that by the percent of that target within the population that you're looking at, and it creates an index. And here's some quick examples. So again, we're looking at two units, like one has a 43% target composition and one is a 30%. The target population would be consistent among both of them because it is what it is, right? That's the prevalence of that target within the market. So the top one is 122. Well, whenever you're looking at an index or thinking about an index, you're thinking about anything that's above 100 means it's over indexing, means it's more likely to do X, Y, or Z. So this one's 22% more likely to be reaching that audience. The one below is under indexing because it's below 100. So it's 14% essentially less likely to be as efficient at reaching that target audience as the average unit, which would be 100. So I hope that makes sense. And as you think about it, and it's kind of what I've been saying the last little bit, composition's great. It's helpful in helping kind of understand maybe the personality of a board, how efficient it is, like I said, at reaching your target audience. But it's the holistic view. It's like composition along with the volume of impressions, TRPs, reach, that really help you kind of select the units that are, meet the needs of your advertisers. And that's important, that creatively kind of is an important word here as well, because again, there's no one right way to do it. It's dependent on the client needs, the goals, depends on how maybe you as a planner like to plan, or as an operator, how you like to look at your inventory. So just a quick example, just looking here, right? There's a handful of units. And if I just look at the comp index and the percent comp, I would rank them this way, right? That first one, it's way over indexing. It's got again, using that example, like not sometimes a low percent comp doesn't mean it's not a good unit. It just means within the market, that's what's available, for that target. But you can see it's really doing great at reaching that audience. It's over indexing 200 by 280, so 180%. But as you start to look at other factors, it helps change your point of view on it. If I look at this one that's highlighted now, in context, it's slightly under indexing, but it's generating the most target impressions. It's also generating a large number of TRPs as well as having great reach. So again, depending on my goals, this may be the one to choose because it's checking off a lot of the other categories. And I think that's one of the key things to think about, that all of these things we're talking about are tools, right, to help you get a sense of, the inventory, the composition of your overall plan, and really help you get a sense of, just the potential of the units that you're putting together. So anyway, just to sum up, a couple things to remember. Indexing tells us, how much more likely or not locations impressions are generated by specific target audiences. So again, thinking about that 100 as the mark, the average, and above, you're more likely, below, you're less likely. And again, really, I want to reiterate this, and I know I've said it a couple times, it's not just one thing, right? Look at the complete set of metrics that you have available to you, and that will really hopefully help guide you along and kind of selecting inventory. And again, like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. And that was about it for this. I do want to just pause and make sure we've answered everybody's questions, or to see if there are any other questions or anything that came through in the chat. Brian, AJ, are there any other questions that have come up?
Not that I've seen just yet.
Okay, cool. Cool. All right. So I want to talk about some of the upcoming webinars and where you can find the session and just other things available. As I said early on, this is our measurement and methodology series. So we're going to be coming back to this idea over the course of the next year. Every month we're at least one session related to helping our members really feel like they feel comfortable about measurement and our methodology. So the next set of sessions that we're going to be doing will now focus more on GeoPath and GeoPath methodology. We wanted to use today to kind of set that foundation, like I said, refresh everybody's memories on some of these metrics. Like I said, I often need to go back and think like, okay, what's the TRP equation again? So I think that's always good to just do a refresher. And so the next session we're going to focus on GeoPath's roadside methodology. So really do a high level view of that. Really help everybody understand, how do we understand audience? How do we know, when we say, this unit has X% of impressions generated by those who have been to Starbucks in the past 30 days, how do we know that? How do we get to that point? So really walking everyone through that and really helping them understand how we get there. How does the visibility adjustment index come into play with that? So that's, we'll be sending out communication on this very soon. But then moving forward from that, a couple of ones to think about over the next coming months will be what are some of the key factors that really impact impressions? Things like illumination, things like the VAI, doing a little maybe deeper dive into it there. So other things what are those key things that really impact impressions? Often, again, we get a lot of questions on our data sources as well as, our sources for our audiences. How frequently are they updated? So we want to do a session dedicated to that. And then in July, wanted to show you how we audit inventory. I think it's a really interesting process and one maybe not everybody's aware of, and really just get in there and show you the tools we use and how a unit comes into our system and gets looked at by our auditors, and how assignments are made and how it gets through the system that way, to really give you a kind of pull back the curtain on that and give you a chance to see how that happens. And this session is going to be available. This is a screenshot of our website. So if you go to the Geek Out tab and scroll down, you'll come to the Out of Home Office Hours section. So this will be available there. This session and any of our other sessions are also just available directly on our YouTube channel as well. And then, all of the videos we showed today, they're edited versions of slightly longer videos. And so all of those are available in both our Geek Out library, which again, you can get to by just going to the Geek Out tab here, and it'll be front and center. You can log into our Geek Out library for members. And it's also available in our Learning Lab as part of a curriculum, so that you can walk through and learn how, learn the basics of media math, learn how to use the Insight Suite, and then, third certificate is kind of tying it all together. So again, if you have any questions, I'll check back in with Brian and AJ and see if there are any other questions. But if you think of questions afterwards, or if you need help anytime, geekout@geopath.org, definitely reach out to us there. First of all, I do want to say thank you, and thank you for everybody for sticking around so long with the session as well. And I do want to check back in, Brian, AJ, any other questions that have come up or that people may be having?
No, just answering a few little ones in the background, but nothing really.
Yeah, everything looks good.
Great. Well, hopefully this was helpful for everybody. And like I said, these materials are available, and we're also available to help with any additional questions you might have. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining this session and all of our sessions. I know a lot of you, I see a lot of the same names often in our sessions. So thank you for always being there and supporting us. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.